Teresa, that's super kind. And I just want to say that like this space this morning is absolutely like the space that I want to be in every morning as I'm drinking my cup of coffee, right? Like, and enjoying time with rural women, because I think this is where power is truly held. And I also just want to say, like, anything that I've ever done has not been done alone. I do it with the support and the networks that I have. And that is really based in like rural women. So Teresa building this network for all of us and like really helping us to connect is such a powerful thing. I'm super happy to be here this morning. I'm going to just actually get right into it and share my screen. I want to, introduce myself. I am Nevada Littlewolf. I am the executive director for Our Children Minnesota and Elevating Education Minnesota. So we have a C3 and a C4 that's working to advance the Page Amendment in the legislature. And let me just, some of you probably have heard about the Page Amendment, but I'll just kind of do a quick overview. We have a really strong partnership with the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. They have provided a lot of research around education gaps and disparities in Minnesota. And I started out doing work on the Iron Range, and I'll say that like a lot of what I was seeing was probably more qualitative in terms of research, like just being able to tell stories and understand like the issues that family and children were dealing with. And I think the ability to actually have research from the Federal Reserve to show that quantitative data around what's really going on in Minnesota is really impactful, and it's really important in terms of driving good policy forward. We also have a number of organizational partners, and we continue to grow this like every day. These are just kind of more of like our organizational partners, and we really can't do it without community and legislative partners. I want to take a minute actually to talk a little bit about Justice Page. I think that I'm completely honest, like I'm not a football person, like didn't really know who like Justice Page in terms of his career in Minnesota, but he was a Minnesota Viking, and he's one of the only defense linemen that have ever been inducted into the Football Hall of Fame. He started the Page Foundation for Education, and he has basically spent his entire life working on education initiatives. And then of course he was a Supreme Court justice on our bench in Minnesota for decades. In fact, the first Black justice to serve in Minnesota. And so it's, the Page Amendment is named for him because he is the person who crafted the language and really did the research and has that experience to understand why a constitutional amendment would help us reframe public education in Minnesota. Community is critical to the success. This is why we're here today, is really engaging all of you. We need students and parents and teachers and families. Community leaders must be at the center of this conversation to transform public education. And we're really, at the campaign, we're really working through community-led and legislative processes and making sure that our voices are centered in that. We have been meeting across the state, Rotary clubs, Optimist clubs, foundations, youth groups, like you name it. We've been out there talking to folks, and we've been in cities across the state, which we're not, a lot of people are like, oh, well, is it an urban issue? Is it a rural issue? Actually, it is a Minnesota issue, and this educational disparities exist in all 87 counties of Minnesota. Since 1990, there has been 312 education amendments or ballot measures in the US, but there have been 0 in Minnesota until now. And as I mentioned earlier, with Justice Page, the Page Amendment is designed for Minnesota. We have 18 signatories in the House and 3 signatories in the Senate, and we are working with our legislative champions now as session is about to open again. and really working to move this forward. So these are some of our authors, and if they happen to be in your district, please call them and thank them. Also, if your senator or representative is not listed, we would love for you to call them and also ask them why and ask them to join. So our current education clause was written in 1857. It's a bit like hard to read in some ways, like the stability of a republican form of government dependent mainly upon the intelligence of the people. You know, it is the duty of the legislature to establish a general and uniform system of public schools. The legislature shall make provisions by taxation or otherwise to secure a thorough and efficient system of public schools. I think the main thing to understand is that, first of all, we have not adjusted this language since 1857, a much different time in our state and in our country. And, you know, we really need to look at this because it's really focuses more on a system versus who is actually impacted. And so our proposed amendment talks more about all children have a fundamental right to a quality public education. So this is really establishing a civil right for children with public education. That education should fully prepare them with the skills necessary for participation in our economy, our democracy, and society. And it needs to be measured, right? Like we need to have accountability in the system. And then it would be a paramount duty of the state to ensure that this quality public schools fulfill that right. We're going to get into this a little bit more as we enter into the conversation with our panelists. Some of the like opposition arguments we hear really have to do with like, oh, the Page Amendment is designed to create a voucher system in Minnesota. And I want to just like take a minute quickly to talk about this. First of all, vouchers could exist today, and that has never happened in Minnesota. We, which kind of leads to the second one, polarized politics in Minnesota. We have a divided House and Senate, and we have never been able to see something like vouchers passed. I just think that's not really a Minnesota value. Secondly, Minnesota, like our language really talks about public education in a way that actually strengthens our language to make sure that we are very serious and we're very focused on this being about public education and strengthening that system. Standardized testing, like we talk about achievement standards, we're working on some language things right now, but ultimately the way that we think about this is that we are not measuring students or the system by standardized testing or MCAs, but that there needs to be a multi-measure approach to the way that we look at children's success in education as well as the school systems. Implementation, currently we are engaging in these kinds of conversations across the state in terms of listening to folks and working towards that implementation process, and we can talk about that more. And funding, we just know from other states that the language we have around paramount duty that we will bring into our Constitution is actually much stronger related to making sure that public schools have the resources that they need. So I want to actually just get started on our panel discussion, and I know there will be questions from folks, but I really want to get into the discussion, and we're going to have time for for more questions. So I'm really delighted, like quite delighted actually, to introduce both Beth Peterson and Melissa Backer-Roach. Both of these women are people that I have worked with for a long time in community and in Sisters in Justice, I guess is how I would describe both of them. Beth Peterson has spent her life working to reduce poverty in rural Minnesota. She's the Planning and Development Director for Kutaska Community Action. She's also Minnesota's Senior Strategist for Vote Run Lead, really working to make sure that we have women in elected office. She has advocated for changes, policy changes that directly affect women and girls, and early childhood education, as well as access to non-traditional career pathways. She's extremely engaged in the community. She was on the Evola City Council. She was on the PTA. She's a mother. She's a wife. She's just done so much. I love when she talks about her children. She says that her children provide her daily occasions to learn about the human condition, which I am like, yes, we should be looking to our young folks and understanding like where they're coming from, but also like, how do we keep ourselves like really, in my opinion, it's the rising generation that really helps us understand like, and grounds us in terms of like where we're at and where we're going. Melissa Becker Roach, small farm in Bear River, Togo area. She's the executive director of Iron Range Partnership for Sustainability. She's a market farmer and a food justice advocate, a woman after my own heart. She serves as a chapter president for St. Louis County's Minnesota Farmers Union. She's also a board director for Lake Superior Sustainable Farming Association. Community organizing, I have, again, stood shoulder to shoulder with Melissa for years and years, and she's also a mom to two amazing children. So getting into the conversation, I really want to frame and help folks understand that this conversation is about rural women's voices and rural women's perspectives. When we talk about rural public education in Minnesota, women are really at the center of that conversation. And how do we think about what our children need, and how do we respond to them as full human beings, like our most important people? And this is really how we're thinking about this conversation, and how we as women leaders have the ability to really shape and form the future, right, of public education. And the Page Amendment is here to really help us in that. So I'm gonna like just get right into it with Beth and like ask a couple of questions for Beth to talk about. So Beth, how does a strong public education shape rural economics and other rural opportunities? What are the effects of the lack of education and lack of opportunities? And how does the Page Amendment go upstream of the issues we face in rural communities?
Great. Thank you, Nevada. And thanks for that introduction. I have to say, on this like really crisp, cold day, it's really warming to be in this space with such powerhouse women from across the region, and to be talking about something that's like so dear to me. So many of you know me and know that I come from generational poverty, and the way my family left that cycle was through education. And, you know, working at community action at Kutaska Community Action, and in the past as an adult education manager, I've seen how quality education can move individuals and families from poverty to prosperity. So like this is an issue like so dear to my heart. And yeah, you know, our local schools are cornerstones of our communities. They address the needs of the industry that's in our community today, helping prepare our youth to keep those industries healthy and strong and innovative. And they also look to prepare students for the careers of tomorrow. And we're really seeing a lot of rural districts needing to consolidate and parent share to meet those needs. And so, you know, the Page Amendment really talks about what that quality education will look like for all of our kids. But also when I think about the Page Amendment, I think about what started this, what got us here. And that is, you know, as Nevada referenced, the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis report in 2019 that really highlighted an education system in crisis. It found major gaps in education outcomes based on race and social economic status. And locally, that story bears out the same. So as a community action agency, Kutaska does a needs assessment every 3 years. And that needs assessment really looks at what are the causes and consequences of poverty. And the lack of education and access to opportunity is one of those, you know, major causes of poverty. So I'm going to get a little wonky here and read from our report, but I think it's really important to understand the climate right now. So Itasca and Coochin counties have a significantly lower degree of post-secondary education attainment than the state of Minnesota. So 36% and 33% respectively, and the state of Minnesota is at 47%. Additionally, the proportion of residents with a high school education or less is 36% in Itasca County and 44% in Coochin County. So that's, significantly higher than the state overall, which is at 32%. What this suggests is that there's potentially poor local educational outcomes, or an economy that lacks the capability of attracting or retaining residents with a higher education level when we compare it to the state or the nation. And educational attainment is really significant. It's really related to individual and family poverty because of the increased potential earnings that education grants a person over a lifetime. So your potential earnings increase the more education you have. And if we look at people in poverty, in Itasca County, 12% of the people in poverty have less than a high school education. And it's even worse in Coochin. That's at 20% of people in poverty. And if we look at high school equivalency, it's 38% in Itasca and 40% in Coochin. I also want you to know that the poverty limit for a family of 4 is really low. It's $26,000 and $26,200. That's very, very low. So we also asked our clients about issues related to employment, and 22% of households with children and 29% of those without children shared that having the necessary skills or training to get them a job or even to advance at that job was a problem, either somewhat or serious. So then we asked them, well, would you like to have more education? And 50% said yes, they would like to further their education. So again, why is this important to the Page Amendment? Well, organizations like Itasca Community Action and other human service agencies, we're the last raft to come by to help individuals and families out of the river of poverty. Nonprofits and service organizations across the region work really hard to help adults re-enter the economy through public assistance, workforce, career pathways programming. All kinds of public programming goes to help adults who've left that pipeline get back into the economy. But the Page Amendment is really an opportunity to go upstream from that and reimagine the future of education here in Minnesota. If we can help our kids, no matter their zip code, no matter their social economic status, no matter the pigment of their skin, by making it a civil right to a quality education, we can prevent many of the disparate outcomes that precipitate living in poverty. And I have to say, like Nevada shared, we rural women, we're at the intersection of all of it. We are pushing at our PTAs. We are working with our city councils or on city council. We're at those school board meetings. We're at the booster clubs and the curriculum meetings. We're really working hard for a better life for our kids. And we are thinking about what's happening in our schools right now, but we want to think about the future too. And now so Nevada shared, I work at Vote Run Lead as well. And so if I put on that nonpartisan 501c3 hat, it isn't just the Page Amendment. We need women at all levels of government and community leadership to change policies that are going to provide a quality education to our kids. We need action now, and we need to look to the future. And so, especially at state government level, we need more women to run and to be in office to create a reflective democracy that we all deserve. So I'm going to take a minute and ask all of you to run for office, to help us make these changes in our education system and to help us, add this language to the Constitution while you look to running for office. And if you're interested in running for office, I think we'll put the Vote Run Lead website in the chat there for you. I'd love to talk to you about that. But again, if I go back to what's happening in our community now, I think there's really great innovative ideas like pushing for 21st century skills, developing academies, but it isn't happening all over the state. It isn't happening in every community. And the Page Amendment really provides us an opportunity to get that same quality education throughout Minnesota for all of our kiddos. Thanks, Nevada.
Oh my God, Beth, I'm so happy to be in the Zoom room with you. I wish we were all in a room actually together, but you just give me goosebumps when you talk, seriously. Thank you for sharing and helping us all understand the impact of what a civil right for for children to have a quality public education could mean, particularly in rural communities. And I'll highlight that, like, we know that children of color, Black, Indigenous, and other students of color, as well as low income children who are socioeconomically disadvantaged, face the highest disparities in Minnesota. And so that is why we see the bipartisan support of Republicans and Democrats, is because we see rural Republicans, as well as folks from the People of Color Indigenous Caucus. They just understand this immediately. They understand that their children are being left behind, and they're the ones that are now the champions for the Page Amendment. So we really want to make sure that we are, again, centering the voices, your voices in this conversation, because you all are the ones who are seeing the most impact of those disparities. And moving into our next speaker, Missy Backer Roach, Missy grew up in the Twin Cities when she was younger, and has spent her life in rural northern Minnesota. And so I really am excited to hear her talk about her observations on rural and urban public education. And this is not meant to be like us versus them kind of conversation, but really to just sort of illustrate the opportunities and the challenges, because we have both in across Minnesota. And I know she's also going to talk about her innovative work that she's leading to bring new perspectives and innovation into rural public education, focusing on local food systems and sustainability. And she's also going to talk about how the Page Amendment drives forward these kinds of innovation and will make it a lot easier for folks across Minnesota to really think about, like, what does the future of education look like, public education look like. So Missy.
Thank you, Nevada. Thank you for having me this morning. It's so wonderful to see so many familiar faces and to be in this space with you. So I truly appreciate this. Like Nevada said, I grew up in Minneapolis. I was born in Bemidji, but I was raised by my mom in Minneapolis. And I now live Bear River, Togo area, which is St. Louis County up in the northern part of the state. And my children attended a county school. And when they started, I noticed how different it was, the rural education versus what I had growing up and graduating from Minneapolis Roosevelt and going to school in Anderson, that was almost downtown Minneapolis. And the opportunities that I had right at my fingertips, I didn't even think about really until my children were going to school and those opportunities weren't there. And that was really hard to navigate with them, and to know that now to know what the Page Amendment does and how the working of education, through our language, and how we're having these paradigm shifts and these visionary movements happening right now, and how we need to transform education. Now is a really good time to look at this. My work now, I live very rurally, but my work now is Iron Range Partnership for Sustainability. And our mission is, we facilitate collaboration towards a sustainable future. But sustainability for us, that means that we're able to meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. And education is a huge component of sustainability in that regard, because we have to be educating for the future, and we have to bring these new perspectives and new ways of doing things, and automating and technology have come along. We need to make sure that our education comes along with that. I've had the opportunity to work in policy with the Farmers Union. And one of the things that I find so interesting is how language really matters. And I think what the Page Amendment does for groups like ours at Iron Range Partnership for Sustainability, and the ability for local school districts is to be able to look at that language and to not have to fit in a box everywhere you go into that same box. I think this allows for visionary expanding, and the education gaps can be addressed in new ways with new perspectives and innovations. Learning from Nevada, the language hasn't been changed since 1857. That's incredible to me, because we don't live in the same time as that, and our ideas have changed, and so our education and how we present that into the amendment, the language needs to be changed too. Some of our work in supporting these perspectives and innovations and visionary shift is working with green innovators with U of M, UMD. We have our annual Earth Fest event, and we sponsor Green Innovators competition. We've been working with local school districts. Hopefully, we're trying to get a deep winter greenhouse going. That's not quite set in stone, but we really want to work and support school districts in these initiatives, because that is the future. We support another Masadi East Environmental Education Center. They've got a farm to school thing going, and they're really working on that. Having farmers markets, getting the kids into a greenhouse, and building that connection from growing something to serving something on a plate. So there's that chain of events of planting, growing, harvesting, preserving, and then making it to the table. But that's an idea that we need to really grab a hold of, because our food security, as we found out, is quite precarious when we have a pandemic, and when we have major meat processing operations shut down, and we rely on our local food economy. And then we realize that we don't have the infrastructure to have that local food economy, but we need to back it up more, because we need to have that education component first. And I think the Page Amendment really allows us to look at how we can make sure that we are addressing these gaps in our education, not just by, the color of our skin or our zip code, but skills, and looking at our future and saying, these are the kinds of things we need to retool on. Because if we're still living with this old narrative of what education should look like, we're not preparing for the future. So that's why I support the Page Amendment. And I see what it can do for our local rural education system through a lot of avenues that I see are lacking, and what we could actually build upon to make a more, just and equitable society, is starting with those components of education first.
Missy, it's incredible, like the work that you're doing and how you're driving innovation through, I think, a lot of challenges. And when I hear you talk about like the opportunities for the young people, the children in your region that Iron Range Partnership for Sustainability is doing, and working on deep winter greenhouse, food justice, and food access, it's truly incredible. So thank you for sharing about that. And I think that you kind of segued a little bit into our next question. We're just going to take a couple of minutes on this next question, and then we're going to move into Q&A before we close out at 9:30. But kind of a crystal ball question, like what positive outcomes? And again, we are living this pandemic every day. And I mean, I can't tell you, like, you all know, right? Like how challenging it has been. But what positive outcomes do you see coming out of COVID in regard to public education? And Missy, I'm just going to start with you.
Wow. Positive outcomes with COVID. That's that's a little difficult for me to, I'm not an educator. And so I don't have the full picture of that, but I want to just as a parent say what COVID allowed for my children to be able to accomplish at home. One of those things was that my son, who is kind of an out of the box thinker, he doesn't necessarily get good grades, but he tries hard. But one of the things he really succeeded on was the ability to kind of unplug from school and navigate some things that he had been wanting to work on, like rebuilding a snowmobile. So he was getting the kind of education component in there. He also built himself a, I want to call it a shed, but it's not a shed. It's a place where he likes to sleep in the summer. It's a tiny house. So carpentry skills, a lot of these things that he was just not able to get that education at school, he was able to bring what he did know and have, we were there to help him and kind of figure it out. But I think that, some of those things like bringing us closer together, they spent more time in the kitchen cooking, looking at recipes. I think some of the things that many of us were doing. So I think those are the positives, but at the same time, there's a lot of things that were not positive about it. But I do like to focus on those positive things. But internet where I live is really unpredictable. It's not great. And so that was an issue that we had to kind of just make the choice to unplug and know that we weren't going to be able to keep up with those assignments and find other outlets for that education, creativity, just kind of to keep those hands busy and the brain moving.
Thanks, Missy. Beth, kind of same question. Like, what are some of the positive things that you've seen come out of the pandemic related to public education?
Yeah, so, the pandemic, and we're really trying to highlight the positive. It's been a real, but I do want to recognize the real strain it's put on our education system and on our educators, and really thank our educators for what they've done, especially, as a mom of a kid with special needs, thinking about how his teachers and his school has really had to push themselves and really thought innovatively on how to connect with him. And I love what Missy, shared there about her son doing the hands-on things that at home that he could really bring, the math or the reading or those other things from school into. And I think educators have really pushed themselves to meet each kid individually where they're at, the kind of individualized education for every kid, whether they were, a special ed or not. And that's where that strain and that rub has come for some educators. And that's why, more resources for education overall are just so important for our communities. I do also want to say that schools have had to come face to face, working the poverty arena. They've had to come face to face with what's happening at home, what's outside of those doors. And so really needing to provide food access and how are they connecting families to housing supports or even broadband support, to really try and equalize the resources and access so that those students could learn no matter the environment of, in-person, virtual, with packets, virtual, online. So I think that it has caused schools to develop partnerships and collaborations where they wouldn't have otherwise. And then, just finally, I would really be remiss if I didn't talk about how much more active parents have become in education, not just because kids at home and that part, but just overall, whether it was positive or negative, parents going to school board meetings really to say, this is what we want from our education, or no, we need this. And at least that dialogue is happening, let's keep it civil and let's really be respectful of each other. But that dialogue is happening that otherwise I'm not sure would have happened.